What's going on, guys? Meteorologist Jonathan Kagas with you on a Monday. That means it is time for Tropics Watch Live. We hang out every Monday to talk about the tropics at about this time. Of course, a lot still going on. We've been talking about Lee and Margo. Those have been the two stories to steal the headlines. We're going to get into all of that. If you're looking for more information on a nice broad view of what's happening in the Atlantic, I have posted a link in the comments if you're watching from YouTube. By the way, we're coming live on the New 6 YouTube channel and on clickorlando.com, the Pinpoint Hurricane app, and the Pinpoint Weather app. So a lot of ways to get this feed as we talk to tropics that still remain extremely active. Again, we are in peak season. The official peak of hurricane season was yesterday. Climatologically, we start to see the activity slowly start to come down as we round out the season. We're going to talk about Lee. We're going to talk about Margo to an extent, but that's not going to bother anybody. And then there is a new threat out there. That is going to be a long, long way down the road, though. It's popping up on models. It's popping up on ensembles. So we are going to talk about that here scientifically, meteorologically, all of the above. All right, so latest on Lee. If you kind of checked out this weekend, Friday, Lee was a crazy, crazy storm. Category 5 hurricane. It rapidly intensified like 2.5-fold times the actual definition and became a 165 mile per hour Category 5 storm. Then you see what happens, and this is why. Let me just kind of go on a tangent. A lot of people are like, we need a Cat 6. We need a Cat 6. We don't, because it is really, really hard for storms to maintain Category 5 intensity, and we saw that over the weekend. There was a little bit of wind shear introduced, and Lee caved. Wind shear is going to win every single time. The thunderstorms just can't handle being tilted. Tropically, they need to be stacked like a stack of pancakes. Anyway, Lee is trying to fire off some thunderstorms across the northern eye wall. You see that big flare-up of purple here. It's been dealing with some dry air. That's why we don't have many thunderstorms here, at least didn't have many thunderstorms here. But we'll see what happens. Lee is expected to get back to Category 4 intensity. It is a major hurricane still. It lost it for just a brief time, major hurricane status. There you go. Big flare-up of thunderstorms, though. It's likely going to try to recharge before it hits cooler water, courtesy of what was Hurricane Franklin. What was that, a week and a half ago now? It's been a while. We'll get into the water temperature in a second. Latest track from the National Hurricane Center. This is hot off the press, the 11 o'clock advisory. And this is what we're going to be watching for. Again, this is obviously not coming to Florida. We talked about that last week when a lot of people were posting old Irma model runs and saying that this thing was going to do Irma. We talked about why that wasn't going to be the case, because Irma was being driven by something completely different. And people were worried about this is coming to the Carolinas. We talked about the likelihood of that happening as well was not zero, but very low. Now we're really watching for our friends through parts of New England and the Canadian Maritimes. That is what is going to have the potential to be impacted directly. Everybody, and I'll show you this in a little bit, everybody along the eastern seaboard, from really the northern Caribbean islands, Florida, through the Carolinas, there's going to be nasty beach conditions. Rip current risk is through the roof over the next really week to 10 days. The waves are going to be kind of big, courtesy of Lee passing safely to our east. Where the direct impacts could come into play, places maybe like eastern Massachusetts, and then certainly Maine in the United States. That looks to be the opportunity if we're going to have U.S. impacts where kind of Massachusetts sticks out, Cape Cod, Nantucket, in that general area. We're going to be watching very closely over the next few days. And then as we get up into Maine, certainly Nova Scotia, you see the cone going out 5 days there, and it's pointed directly at us. So again, it's something that we need to watch closely. Again, this is not coming to Florida. This really never had a shot to come to Florida because of the way that the steering currents were set up. If I have my friends watching from the great state of Florida or through the Carolinas, again, we are good. Just watch the rip currents. Okay, so here is the cone overlaid over the sea surface temperatures. And notice how we go from this like very big rust color to more of like a red or orange. Franklin was all up in this business over here. It stayed there for a while. It churned up the waters. So as Lee tries to strengthen, and it's going to have maybe 2 to 3 more days to do so as it kind of meanders like right down in here. Once it gets up kind of west of Bermuda, it's going to run into that, relatively speaking, cooler water temperatures. Let me back up my arrow and let me turn on the water temperature. So you see it there. We're back to the upper 70s. So typically, tropical systems want water temperature of 80, 81 degrees or hotter. Certainly, these temperatures can still sustain a tropical system, but we're not going to see any kind of like explosive development or anything like that. But these temperatures will likely promote some weakening, maybe finding the Gulf Stream. You see where the Gulf Stream is at clearly, where we go from the mid to upper 70s back to the low to mid 80s. That's that warmer water coming from the loop current and then back up the eastern United States, the east coast of the United States. Regardless, though, we will be watching this coming on a weakening trend. Still, if this were to impact land, it would be a formidable storm, strong tropical storm at the very least, maybe a low-end hurricane, but we could start to get some of that extra tropical characteristics in there as well as it merges with a system coming off of the New England coast. So let me go back to the spaghetti models, and then I want to show you some ensembles after the steering current here. We always love the ensembles. I know everybody does that. All right, so here are the latest models, and most of these keep the center away from the United States. Now, for our friends in the Canadian Maritimes, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, look at this. Most of these are kind of honing in on us here. We do have the GFS, that's the purple, that's kind of bending back towards Maine. We also have the hurricane wharf right here, the H wharf. You see that in kind of that peach or salmon color, kind of bending back as well. And that is likely the reason why you saw the cone kind of bend back. They are, the Hurricane Center, when I say they're likely accounting for that possibility that we start to see this kind of turn back through and maybe impact more of New England. Again, that is on the lower end of possibilities, but nonetheless, it is something. The reason why we may be losing an escape route, and this is something we talked about last week. It was a very, very wavy jet stream pattern. It's very hard to sample until we get very close. And we're starting to get into that close realm. But the deal with this is now, let me see if I can take this back to kind of show you how this comes in. Notice, here we go, this is Friday afternoon. So this is 4 or 5 days away still. So this is still a long time. I mean, we're not talking until any kind of potential direct land interaction or land impacts until we get into the weekend. So there is still a ton of time. I mean, Lee is just dragging on. This is all to be expected. That's what we cautioned last week when we saw all of those models everywhere and everybody saying, we know where this is going to go. People were talking about the Carolinas were going to get hit. This was definitely coming to Florida. That's what we always preach on this channel. You can't pay attention to some of that noise out there because it's just all kind of scare tactics and clickbait and all that stuff. We're pretty dialed in here on the steering pattern. There's still some uncertainty as if this can kind of lift to the north or maybe jog back out to sea a little bit. So here's what we're kind of watching. Let me kind of take this out into motion. That big red circle with all that little, although the black circles around it, that would be the hurricane or strong tropical storm or kind of extra tropical storm at this point as we get this to Saturday afternoon. So really Friday into Saturday, potentially anyway, that's when you start to look at impacts. The thing that I want to show you here is what's kind of steering this thing. So one of the things was this to kind of go up and then out into the North Atlantic. Well, here is our big building area of high pressure. Anywhere you see this kind of teal color, that is where we have high pressure. And you see that kind of bending back like this. Football season just started. I'll use an offensive lineman analogy. That's what this is kind of doing to Lee here. It's kind of blocking it from going. So the defense is trying to get to the quarterback, and high pressure is kind of not letting Lee escape. It's kind of forcing it and slowing it down and forcing it back to the west. This is one of the things that we were talking about last week were the wild cards for any kind of land interaction, and it continues to look like there's going to be this kind of like banana shape here, this banana high pressure. We have highs on each side. Lee tries to lift north through it, and it's very difficult for these things to do that as it goes right on through. The other scenario is to have this kind of lift up this way if it can find some kind of weakness. The other wild card that is influencing how strong that high pressure is, you see this area out here. I'm starting to get a lot of telestration lines on here, but that would be likely at this point Hurricane Margo. So all of this influences each other. how we have kind of two hurricanes in the middle of, or on the bookending a big chunk of high pressure, it complicates things, especially when we don't have a ton of data on that area of high pressure and on Margo, because it's just too far away from our planes to get out there, our Hurricane Hunter aircraft anyway, to get out there. So a lot that we are watching. At this point, I want to show you some of the ensembles if I have that on the screen. I always like to show you these because it takes out some of the uncertainty, or at least kind of hones in on an area. These are the European ensembles. So 51 members of the European model. They have different conditions put into them, so we can kind of see the range of outcomes rather than a forecast point. And you see here, first and foremost, that we do have a weakening system. So we go back to the oranges. You see the greens as we get up in here. That's, if you look on top here, 40 to 50 knot wind. So that is a kind of strong tropical storm. We're looking at, again, potentially towards the weekend. In terms of the track, though, notice we just have a few members like closer towards, one towards New York City. I know a lot of the New York papers, news outlets are kind of latching on to that. I think that's on the that is on the way outside of realm of possibilities. Could there be some outer bands coming through? Yeah, but I don't think this thing's making landfall in New York City or around New York City. Where we do have to watch a little bit closer, though, is closer to Cape Cod, Nantucket, the appendage of the United States, where that kind of sticks out right into the ocean. And then certainly as this lifts to the north, we're watching closely for our friends in Maine and then in Nova Scotia. Note on the other side of that, the other extreme, there are only a few members that completely miss land. So we can kind of, if we take out the extremes on the left side and extremes on the right side, we get that right down the middle kind of look that we're going to be watching this closely again for Cape Cod, watching this closely for Maine, and then for the Canadian Maritimes. GFS has a very similar story. It does have a few extra members further to the west, closer towards Massachusetts. Notice there are none favoring the Jersey or New York shoreline. And then we have a lot of members out here for us in Maine and then Nova Scotia. Any kind of land impact, again, not coming for the next 5 to 7 days. You see that it's still a pretty wide spread as we try to figure out what that area of high pressure is going to do. Is it going to completely block the escape route? Is it going to kind of halfway block the escape route? Regardless, that's going to be something that we are going to be watching closely there over the next couple of days. Now, regardless, we are going to have crazy beach conditions over the next week. Note this yellow here. I'm going to point out that yellow color that you see on the map. That's wave heights of about 9 to 12 feet. And you see that kind of work their way into the Turks and Caicos over the next, really, today. And then as we get further into, there's Friday, we have all those swells kind of pushing right out through the Carolinas, into Georgia, into Florida, and then certainly as this continues to lift towards New England and the Canadian Maritimes, those dangerous conditions are going to get there. That's at the very least. Again, we still have the potential for this thing to really impact land by the time we get into the weekend. So we're going to be watching that, again, very, very closely as we move forward over the next, 5 to 7 days? Speaking of something that we're going to watch closely and have a lot of time to watch, we have, of course, you can clearly see where we have Margo. This is kind of my lone talk about Margo. I guess we did mention Margo a little bit ago, but there is Margo. There is the Lee. You got two little guys down here. And the development zone, really this one doesn't have a shot. No, actually, we might see these two kind of merge into one and then eventually take over out here. That orange blob that you see there drawn on your screen, that is going to be where the Hurricane Center believes that development is going to be possible. Since this is broad and there's likely going to be a few quasi-centers trying to compete to be the dominant center here, this one may take its time to develop, and I want to show you that right here. You know, if you've been with me for the hurricane season, I like to show you the model spin, the vorticity, the kind of low-level spin to kind of show us what we have going on. And again, you can clearly see where we have Margo, there is Lee, And then here is our stretched out thing like a string bean. Again, it is not organized by any means. We're going to take this further out into the future. Here's September 15th. It's still kind of broad, but we do have a closed center here. And again, this is all going to be dependent. I'm saying closed center now, but this is something we're going to have to watch over the next 4 to 5 days to see if it actually does it by this point. Again, it's going to be, I think, a struggle early on for this thing to start. But there's September 15th, and we have a system developing. But then watch what happens as we go forward. You see that big consolidated ball there of red. That is when we have certainly something well-defined and a stronger system coming through. That's the 19th of September, and then you see it kind of jog to the north. We would love that if that happens, but then if that does happen, we would have to watch it closely again for Bermuda. We've kind of been in the crosshairs all season long as these have kind of worked their way, again, kind of tugged north as we hopefully dodge most of Lee this time around. But we'd be watching, again, all this area for potential impacts of that system. And again, at the very least, it would chew up the beaches. All up and down the eastern seaboard if it got that close. GFS is a very similar story. You see the spinning there of Lee, and you see it right here. This kind of illustrates that one purple line there. That's the GFS rendition getting this thing. This would be an ugly situation for Maine, for Nova Scotia, for maybe even parts of Vermont, New Hampshire as well, as those heavy rain bands come through. So again, it's not set in stone, but we're going to have to watch that for the Northeast and for parts of New England specifically, coastal areas of Maine, maybe Cape Cod and Nantucket. So again, watching that here. What I want to focus on with this particular model, though, is right in here. GFS gets it going on September 17th, a little bit later, and then keeps it low. And I'm going to show you some ensembles of this in a second, and I think that's going to be the key, as it typically is. A stronger storm is going to tend to go up and out. The longer it takes to get going, the further west it can get, though. So there you go, September 19th, spiraling right there, and then it kind of gets it close to the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas on September 21st. So that is 10 days into the future. So this is another one of those 7 to 10, maybe 14 days, just like Hurricane Lee, that we are just watching, painfully watching. And I know the anxiety goes up with where is it going to go? What's it going to impact? It's best with these to just kind of hang out and just keep it in the back of your mind and to not get anxious, because I know a lot of people were in Florida and in the Carolinas with Hurricane Lee, and you see what happened. They're not coming to Florida or the Carolinas. Lee's not coming there. So it's important to remember where you're getting your information. If you don't know how to use the spaghetti models, don't look at them, because each model represents something different, a different model. And if you don't know the biases of that model, it's going to increase your stress number or stress level. That's what we are here for, to show you what model's doing what, and to give you our best representation of what we believe is going to happen given the atmospheric data that we have and given the atmospheric conditions. And that's what we're going to do. Alrighty, guys. Still rocking and rolling. We are at least on the other side of peak now. I know it doesn't mean much. We still have a long way to go. We still have all of September. We have a lot of October, and we'll see if we have a late season this year rolling through November. I hope not. But the way things have gone the last few years, we have had that last push. We're certainly starting to get that as we roll through the peak of hurricane season. Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, thank you so much for the comments. If you are watching on clickorlando.com, thank you very much. If you're watching on the Pinpoint Weather app, love you guys. Thank you for downloading that app. And same for the Hurricane app. It's the best hurricane app on the market. If you're watching on YouTube and don't have it, search WKMG in your app store. It's great. Anytime a storm develops, anytime there's a storm update, you're going to get that first right on that app, because it comes right from the National Hurricane Center. We have that data being pulled right in. It's a great tool to have. Plus, you get updates like this from us, real meteorologists. Alrighty, guys. Have a great afternoon. Have a great week. We'll keep an eye on everything here, and we'll keep you posted. Take it easy, guys. Talk to you soon.